Have you ever had the strange feeling that a moment was repeating itself? Not exactly the same, but close enough to feel unsettling. You're walking through a familiar street, answering a routine message, listening to someone speak, when a detail lands with uncomfortable precision, as if you've already been here before. Nothing glitches, nothing breaks. Yet something inside you pauses. The world keeps moving, but your attention lingers, caught in a thin gap between expectation and experience. You don't label it. You don't question your sanity. You just notice a quiet sense that reality didn't fully line up this time. These moments don't announce themselves as extraordinary. They happen during ordinary tasks, in neutral moods, when the mind isn't searching for meaning. That's what makes them difficult to dismiss. In discussions around quantum consciousness and the hidden reality beneath perception, experiences like this are often reduced to coincidence or cognitive error. But when it happens to you, it doesn't feel random. It feels precise, almost deliberate, as if the structure holding things together briefly showed its edge. You might feel it as a subtle pressure in the chest, a momentary stillness behind the eyes, a sense that explanation is slightly behind what you're perceiving. You return to what you were doing, yet the feeling stays, quiet and unresolved, not demanding belief, not offering answers, just suggesting that the way reality is supposed to work may not be the whole story. And if that suggestion is even partially true, stepping away now wouldn't restore comfort. It would mean leaving just before the pattern starts to reveal itself. There's nothing you need to agree with here, and nothing to correct. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something in this description matched an internal experience you rarely name. That kind of recognition doesn't need expression, but when it happens, people often mark it without thinking, almost as a private signal to themselves that they were paying attention. Staying connected works the same way. It isn't a commitment, just a decision to continue following a line of awareness rather than letting it dissolve back into noise. If you want to leave a trace of that moment, write a single sentence that begins with, "I noticed that," "I've been sensing," or "This made me realize," and finish it with one specific observation from your own experience. Nothing general, nothing polished. Because what comes next isn't interpretation. It's where observation first altered what science believed reality was allowed to do. For most of the 20th century, physics assumed a simple rule. Reality exists independently of whether anyone is paying attention to it. Particles move, fields interact, observation comes after the fact. That assumption began to fracture in 1989, inside the Hitachi Advanced Research Laboratory in Japan, when physicist Akira Tonomura conducted a refined version of the double-slit experiment using single electrons. Not beams, not clouds. Individual particles released one at a time, under extreme isolation, recorded with sensitive detectors. When no attempt was made to determine which path an electron took, the results were unmistakable. An interference pattern slowly emerged, as if each particle behaved like a wave, spreading across possibilities within the quantum field. But the moment the system was adjusted to observe the electron's path, to extract information, the pattern collapsed. The wave-like behavior vanished. The electron behaved as a localized particle. Nothing physical touched it. No force intervened. Only information entered the system. This wasn't philosophy or metaphor. It was measurement. The observer effect revealed that observation doesn't merely reveal reality, it participates in how outcomes resolve. And this means that you are not interacting with a fully formed world that simply unfolds in front of you. At the most fundamental level we can measure, reality responds to being known. Psychologically, this mirrors something familiar. The moment you expect an outcome, your perception narrows, attention selects, possibility collapses into prediction. Consciousness expansion doesn't feel dramatic here. It feels like tension, like noticing that certain interpretations arrive faster than evidence. Just as particles behave differently when observed, experiences feel different once they're anticipated. The experiment didn't suggest that human belief controls matter, but it did establish something quieter and more unsettling. Information shapes behavior before certainty arrives. If observation alters physical systems, what happens when attention becomes habitual, when expectations are reinforced over years? Because the next discovery suggests that observation doesn't just affect events, it shapes the very framework through which reality is allowed to appear at all. And this explains why perception doesn't feel passive when it shifts. It feels physical. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, working across institutions including the University of Wisconsin-Madison, developed what became known as integrated information theory. His research wasn't focused on particles, but on coherence, how separate neural signals combine into a unified experience. The core idea was precise and measurable. Conscious experience emerges not from activity alone, but from how tightly information is integrated across a system. When signals are fragmented, experience feels thin. When they synchronize, perception deepens. This wasn't metaphorical language. It was quantified through mathematical models and neurophysiological data, tracking how information flows across networks. And this explains why certain moments arrive with a sudden stillness, why intuition doesn't feel loud, but clean, why clarity often shows up as the absence of noise rather than the presence of insight. In those moments, the body registers coherence first, a soft release in the shoulders, a quieting in the chest, a sense that nothing needs to be added. The system isn't processing more, it's aligning better. Then the sensation fades, and thought rushes back in to fill the gap. Tononi's work suggested something subtle and uncomfortable. The brain isn't optimized to maximize truth. It's optimized to maintain coherence. Predictable models are favored over accurate ones because they cost less energy. And when information challenges those models, it creates friction, psychological and physiological. This is where perception becomes a loop. The brain predicts, the world responds. The prediction tightens. Over time, coherence can harden into rigidity. Understanding this carries a cost. Because once you see that experience is shaped by how information is integrated, you also see what happens when coherence is disrupted. Stability gives way to uncertainty. Familiar meanings loosen. And that destabilization isn't abstract, it's felt. Which is why recognizing this pattern isn't just an intellectual shift. It quietly asks what you're willing to lose in order to perceive more clearly. Once you start noticing how perception organizes itself, everyday life can feel subtly misaligned. Conversations continue, routines hold, people laugh at the right moments. But something inside you lags half a step behind, observing instead of fully merging. It's not dramatic isolation. It's quieter than that. A sense that you're present, yet not entirely anchored to the same assumptions that seem to hold everyone else in place. You might hesitate before reacting, feel less certain about conclusions that once felt obvious, or notice how quickly others rush to explanations that no longer settle you. This can create doubt, not just about the world, but about yourself. You may wonder if you're overthinking, if you've lost something that used to make life simpler. Familiar motivations can feel thinner. Old certainties stop offering comfort. There's a mild grief in realizing that belonging often depends on shared interpretations, and yours have started to loosen. It isn't that you found better answers. It's that the questions no longer stay quiet. And yet, this displacement doesn't come with clarity attached. It comes with uncertainty, with moments of wanting to step back into the ease of not noticing. The cost of seeing beneath the surface is that the surface never fully satisfies again. Still, something holds you here. Not optimism, not conviction, but a sense that what you're perceiving matters, even if it's uncomfortable. Because beneath the loneliness and doubt, there's a growing recognition that this sensitivity wasn't created by accident. And understanding why that is changes the meaning of everything you've felt so far. What you've been calling different isn't a flaw in your personality. It's what happens when your perception stops automatically sealing the cracks. Most people live inside a smooth narrative because their minds are built to keep things stable, not necessarily true. But you've been sensing the seams, the moments where reality doesn't feel fully settled, where the story arrives a fraction of a second too late. We started with that quiet glitch, then followed it into science. Tonomura's 1989 work at Hitachi, where the observer effect showed that information isn't a spectator in the quantum field. It's part of what resolves an outcome. Then we moved into the nervous system, where Tononi's framework pointed to something equally unsettling: Experience deepens or thins depending on how coherently information integrates, and the brain will often choose coherence over accuracy because coherence costs less. That's why certain realizations arrive as a bodily silence before they become thoughts. That's why your discomfort feels physical. It's not only in your head, it's in the way your system organizes reality. So the loneliness, the doubt, the sense of not belonging, those weren't signs that you're broken. They were signs that your internal model is loosening, and you can feel it happening. The core insight is quiet but sharp. Suffering isn't only what happens to you. It's what becomes inevitable when your perception keeps collapsing possibility into the same familiar meaning. And once you notice that, you can't unnotice it, because now the question changes. It's no longer, why does this keep happening to me? It becomes, what is consciousness actually doing here? Observing a world that already exists, or participating in the way it becomes experience at all? That question doesn't resolve cleanly, and it isn't meant to. It's a doorway, and the closer you get to it, the harder it becomes to go back to a life where belief stays invisible. So this isn't an ending, just a moment where things settle into place. Not certainty, orientation. If something in this felt familiar, it's because you've already been living with the question, even before it had language. Continuing from here isn't about following content or agreeing with conclusions. It's about staying with an attention that's already active, already noticing patterns it can't fully unsee. There's a natural continuation to this, one that turns the focus inward, toward the structures that quietly shape how experience becomes difficult, repetitive, or heavy. That exploration is called How Your Beliefs Quietly Create Your Suffering, and it begins where perception stops blaming the world and starts examining the lens it's been using all along. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.